The wire confirmation came through on a Tuesday morning in April, and I read it twice before I put the phone down. $97,400. Transferred to Caldwell Hospitality Group, LLC. I'd been moving money around for the better part of 2 weeks to pull that together, liquidating some bonds, closing out an investment account I'd opened the year I sold my half of the business. None of it had been easy to part with. All of it had taken about 2 seconds to decide. That was the last of my private savings. The money I'd set aside for the years when my knees finally gave out entirely, or when the truck needed replacing, or when I wanted to do something I hadn't planned for yet. My son didn't know I had it. My ex-wife didn't know. As far as anyone in my family was concerned, I was a retired 63-year-old man who lived alone in a 3-bedroom house I should probably sell, who drove a truck that was embarrassingly old, who bought store-brand cereal because he had to. I'd never corrected that impression. There's a particular comfort in being underestimated. Nobody asks you for things you're not ready to give. But this I was ready to give. My son had been cooking since he was old enough to reach the stove. He worked his way up through kitchens in Dallas, Atlanta, and eventually Chicago, earned his credentials, staged at restaurants with waiting lists that stretched 2 months out. He had an instinct for food, for how flavors worked against each other, for what a room needed when people sat down hungry and got up something more than fed. He'd been talking about his own place since his early 20s. The problem is that talking and doing are separated by a gap the size of several $100,000, and most of the people on his investor list kept finding reasons to delay. Last fall, the deal he'd been working for 2 years started falling apart. The space he wanted was going to someone else. He called me on a Sunday, and I heard the particular flatness in his voice that meant he'd already decided the dream was over. I told him to send me the business plan. He sent it. I spent 10 days going through it, then called a friend of mine who'd run a restaurant for 20 years and asked him the hard questions, then called my son back. "I can fund this," I said. Another long silence on the line. "Dad, you can't." "I didn't ask if you thought I could. I'm telling you I can." We worked out the terms over the next couple of weeks. I'd cover the build-out, the equipment lease, the first 6 months of operating costs. He'd pay me back over 3 years once the restaurant was stable. I'd be a silent partner, no hovering, no opinions on the menu, no showing up on a random Tuesday to tell him how to run his kitchen. Just the money, and one condition. Opening night, I said, "I want to be there." "Of course," he said. "Dad, obviously." I took him at his word. That was my mistake, or one of them. 3 days before the grand opening, my daughter-in-law called. She's not a villain. I want to say that plainly, because it's true, and because I've spent a long time thinking about this, and that's where I land. She works hard, she keeps the household running, and she loves my son in the specific way that practical people love each other. Steadily, without a lot of visible noise. But she has never quite known what to do with me. I don't fit into her categories. I'm not the kind of retired father-in-law who plays golf and goes to early bird dinners and has opinions about his grandchildren's screen time. I don't need to be managed, but that's what she seems most comfortable doing. Managing me at arm's length, with carefully pleasant phone calls twice a year. This call was pleasant the way anesthesia is pleasant. It takes a moment to feel the cut. "I wanted to touch base about Saturday," she said. "Looking forward to it," I said. A pause. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about. We've been thinking, with a crowd that size, all the noise and stimulation, it can be a lot for anyone, but especially if someone's been a little off their game lately." My hand tightened on the phone. "I'm not off my game." "Of course," she said quickly. "But we've both noticed. Just small things. You've seemed a bit foggy at times, a little forgetful. We talked it over and thought maybe a big crowded event isn't the best environment for you right now. What if we did a quiet dinner instead? Just the 3 of us, sometime next week? You'd get to see the restaurant, and it would be so much more relaxed." I recognized the shape of what she was doing. She'd built a very tidy structure. We've noticed, we talked it over, so that the decision appeared to have already been made collaboratively by people who cared about me. Declining was positioned as a form of self-care. Showing up was positioned as a problem I'd be creating. "I'll think about it," I said. She said she appreciated my understanding. I said nothing else. The next morning, my neighbor knocked on the door to return a socket wrench he'd borrowed. He's been next door for 11 years. His kid used to ride a bike in my driveway. He stood on the porch and made small talk for 5 minutes. And in the middle of those 5 minutes, he said, "Ran into your daughter-in-law at the hardware store yesterday. She mentioned the restaurant thing Saturday. Said you were having some trouble. Memory issues, she thought. Said that's why you weren't going." He said it with concern. Pure, genuine concern, the kind a person has when they've already decided the information is true and are just processing what it means. I told him I was fine. He nodded, but slowly, in the way that meant he wasn't completely sure. After he left, I sat down at the kitchen table and didn't move for a while. I have a condition called clear thinking. It's not always a comfortable condition. What it told me, sitting there, was that my daughter-in-law hadn't invented a small social excuse to explain my absence. She'd circulated a narrative. She'd gone to the hardware store and said memory issues to my neighbor in a tone that warranted a slow, concerned nod. By Saturday evening, every person at that opening would have a version of the same story. My son's father had been struggling, cognitive stuff. Nothing specific, but enough to be sad about, enough to explain why he wasn't there. They were going to spend my money and bury me in a soft, sympathetic lie, and every person who heard it would feel sorry for me without ever knowing they'd been deceived. I got up, I went to my closet. I own one good jacket, charcoal wool, bought for my retirement dinner 5 years ago. I pulled it out and hung it on the doorknob where I'd see it in the morning. I found my decent shoes in the back of the closet and set them on the floor below it. I wasn't going Saturday to celebrate. I was going because I had spent 8 months and $97,000 on a building I'd never been formally acknowledged as part of, and someone was about to stand at a microphone in that building and take a bow. I intended to be in the room when they did, and before I went to bed, I put my attorney's business card in the breast pocket of that jacket. Because I'm 63 years old, not confused, and I do not walk into situations without preparation. The restaurant occupied what used to be a textile warehouse on the east side of downtown. The kind of building that looks like it's always been beautiful, but didn't look that way for most of the past 100 years. During the renovation, I'd reviewed every line of the budget. I knew the exposed brick had cost $18,000 to restore. I knew the custom ventilation hood above the main cooking line had taken 6 weeks to fabricate. I knew the reclaimed oak bar top had come from a barn in Kentucky, that the walk-in cooler installation had run 3 weeks late and nearly derailed the whole timeline, that the electrician they'd originally hired quit midway through, and they'd brought in someone new at a premium. I knew all of it because the invoices had come to me for approval. For 8 months, my name was on everything. I drove past the front entrance without stopping. The valet line was already stacked, and through the plate glass, I could see the warm amber-lit interior I'd paid for, full of people in good clothes. I parked on a side street 2 blocks over and walked back. There's a service entrance at the back of every commercial kitchen, and I'd seen the building plans. The kitchen staff let me through without a word. A man in a good jacket who moves with purpose doesn't raise questions, as long as he doesn't look like he's looking for someone. I found a position near the back of the main room, against the wall beside one of the structural columns. The restaurant was warm and loud in the way a room full of happy people always is, and for a moment I let myself just look at what the idea had become after all the money and planning had been converted into plaster and tile and light. It was good. It was genuinely good. I felt that before I felt anything else. I spotted my son near the bar, surrounded by a cluster of men I recognized. The investors who had come in after me with smaller amounts, once the space was already secured. He was animated, confident, at ease in a way he sometimes isn't. He had on a chef's jacket with the restaurant name stitched over the chest, and he was laughing at something one of them had said, and for a moment I let myself feel proud of him. Then I found my daughter-in-law across the room. She was talking to a woman I didn't know, and the woman was listening in that particular way. Tilted head, soft eyes. That meant whatever was being said was something sympathetic. I watched my daughter-in-law finish the sentence and watched the woman nod the same slow nod my neighbor had given me that morning. She was making sure the story was in place before the microphone came out. My son gave his speech just after 8 o'clock. He thanked his staff. He thanked his investors by name, going down the list. He thanked his wife, and the room applauded warmly, and someone in the back let out a long whistle. He talked about the years of working other people's lines, about what it meant to finally have a space of his own, about the neighborhood, the building's history, gratitude. My name was not in that speech. Not directly, not indirectly, not as my father or the person who believed in this first, or the person without whom none of you would be standing here tonight. There was no version of me in the speech at all. I had expected this. I want to be honest. I had expected it from the moment I walked in through the service entrance. But expectation doesn't actually soften impact. It just tells you the shape of the thing before it arrives. I stepped away from the column. I turned toward the exit. The kitchen noise was louder from that angle, the controlled chaos of a line running full speed on opening night, and the smell was extraordinary, real cooking in a real room, and I thought, go home, heat something up, come back to the rest of it later, quietly, like you handle everything. That was when a hand closed around my elbow. Excuse me, sir. The man was around 40, in work clothes that were one tier more formal than usual. The specific compromise of someone who installs commercial equipment and got dressed up to deliver bad news. He had a clipboard and the look of a person who had been holding his breath for the better part of an hour. Are you the primary contract holder on the kitchen equipment agreement? I've got a name and the LLC, but I need to confirm in person. I confirmed. The breath came out of him all at once. He explained quickly. The secondary damper on the main exhaust hood had failed during afternoon prep. Fire code required a signed variance or a service authorization before the kitchen could operate the main range at full capacity. He needed the contract holder. He'd been trying to find someone with authority for 45 minutes. My son had told him I wasn't there, had told him I wasn't well. I looked at the man for a moment. I'm here, I said. I'm perfectly well. Yes, sir, I can see that. I just need the authorization. I took the clipboard. I looked at the form. Across the room, I could see my daughter-in-law tracking me. I caught the exact moment she recognized the equipment contractor standing beside me and understood what was happening. She touched my son's arm. He turned. He saw me. His expression did something complicated. Not quite shock, not quite guilt. Something that had no clean name and lived between the two. He came through the room toward us. I watched him assemble a casual look while he walked. Dad, he said, keeping his voice low, you came. I did. I thought we talked about this. Someone called me and told me I had memory problems, I said. That's not a conversation. That's a diagnosis I didn't ask for and don't have. Sir, the man with the clipboard said carefully, I'm sorry, but I need this resolved. If I don't get authorization in the next few minutes, I have to shut down the main cooking line. My son reached for the clipboard. I'll sign it. Sir, you're not listed on the agreement. The contract holder has to authorize. It's my restaurant. The agreement is in another name, sir. One of the investors had drifted close enough to hear. I'd met him once, briefly, back in November. Donahue, a real estate developer. The kind of man who reads contracts for a living because that's how you stay in business. He looked at the clipboard. He looked at me. You're his father, he said. I am. Your name is on the equipment lease? A beat. My son said it's a legacy signature from the initial paperwork. Donahue looked at my son steadily. You told us the seed capital came from a private equity contact, someone you'd been in talks with for 2 years. It was private. Was it equity, or was it your father? The room around us was still doing what it was doing, people talking, a soft melody from somewhere near the window, glasses touching glasses. But the small circle around us had gone quiet in the way that water goes quiet before it drops off a ledge. My daughter-in-law stepped forward. Her smiles cost her something to maintain, and she maintained it anyway. There's obviously been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice smooth and warm. We've always been transparent about the investment structure. We're so grateful for all the support, including from family. Dad's been wonderful. She looked at me. We're so glad you made it. She reached for my arm as she said it, a guiding touch. The kind you use with someone who needs steering. I moved my arm away. I appreciate that, I said. I also appreciate that 45 minutes ago, this gentleman was told I wasn't here, and wasn't well, and couldn't help him, while your husband was at a microphone thanking everyone in the room. Donahue said nothing. He was looking at the floor now, in the way of a man who is recalculating something that he'd thought was already settled. The equipment contractor shifted beside me. Sir, I really need a decision. I held the clipboard. I looked at my son. And for just a moment, I saw something real in his face. Not the chef jacket confidence, not the ease he'd worn all evening. Something younger and less composed. Something that might have been the 20-year-old who first told me, sitting at my kitchen table, about the kind of restaurant he wanted to build someday. Dad, he said, just that, quietly. I thought about the Sunday phone call last fall. His voice when he thought the dream was over. How fast he'd said, of course, obviously, when I asked to be there opening night. You told the neighbors I was losing my memory, I said. You told this man I wasn't here. Tonight, in front of everyone whose respect you've spent years trying to earn, you were going to let them carry that story home. I looked at him steadily. I paid for this building. I paid for this room. I paid for the jacket you're wearing tonight. Nobody said anything. Donahue didn't. My daughter-in-law didn't. My son didn't. I set the clipboard down on the nearest table. I'm invoking the inspection clause in the service agreement, I said to the contractor. Section 9. No variance is signed until there's a full system inspection on record. Have your office contact my attorney Monday morning. I put the business card from my breast pocket on top of the clipboard. I'd recommend shutting down the main cooking line as required by code. He picked up the card, looked at it, looked at my son, looked back at me. I'm sorry for the trouble, sir, he said, and turned toward the kitchen. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at my son one more time. There were things I wanted to say, things I'd been turning over on the drive over and in the years before that probably, but none of them belonged in this room, in front of these people, on this particular night. Some conversations need more space than a grand opening provides. Some of them need both people to be ready, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for the real one yet. Good night, I said. I walked out through the front, past the bar I'd paid for, past the tables I'd paid for, past the hostess, who held the door and said, "Have a wonderful evening." The night air was cold and smelled like nothing in particular, which felt like a relief after the warmth inside. I walked the 2 blocks back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute, with the engine off. Down the street, the restaurant glowed warm and golden, and somewhere in that kitchen they were figuring out how to manage a full dining room with a limited cooking line on the most important night of the year. I drove home. It was just past 9 when I got in. I took off the good jacket and hung it back up. I wasn't hungry, but I made myself eat anyway. Scrambled eggs, the way I've been making them since my 30s, with too much butter and a little hot sauce and toast that came out slightly darker than it should have. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd read the wire confirmation 8 months ago in April, when the number was $97,400 and the hope was still intact. The eggs cost me maybe $1.50. I ate every bite, and I didn't rush, and when I was done, I washed the pan and the plate and went to bed.